Today we are on Canto 3, Chapter 21, Text 18. Nate jaraksha brahmirayuresham Nate jaraksha brahmirayuresham Trayodasaram trishatam shashti parva Trayodasaram trishatam shashti parva Sannemi ananta chadiyatri nabhi Sannemi ananta chadiyatri nabhi Karala soto jagadachida davat Karala soto jagadachidya dhavat Nate jaraksha brahmirayuresham Trayodasharam trishatam shashti parva Sanneminanta chadiyatri nabhi Karala shoto jagadachidya dhavat Nate jaraksha brahmirayuresham Trayodasaram trishatam shashti parva Shaneminanta chadiyatri nabhi Karala shroto jagadachidya dhavat Nate jarakshir brahmirayuresham Nayodasaram trishatam shashti parva Sanneminanta chadiyatri nabhi Karala shoto jagadachidya dhavat Nate jaraksha brahmirayuresham Trayodasharam trishatam shashti parva Sanneminanta chadiyatri nabhi Karala shoto jagadachidya dhavat Nate jaraksha brahmirayuresham Trayodasaram trishatam shashti parva Sanneminanta chadiyatri nabhi Karala shoto jagadachidya dhavat Vaishnavis Nate Jaraksha Brahmirayiresham Trayodasharam Trishatam Shashti Parva Shannemyananta Chariyatrinaabhi Karala Shroto Jagadachidya Dhavat Nam Not Te Your Ajara of imperishable Brahman Aksha on the axle Brahmihi rotating Ayuhu span of life Esham of the devotees Trayodasa 13 Aram spokes Trishatam 300 Shashti 60 Parva functions Shat 6 Nemi rims Ananta innumerable Chadi leaves Yat which Tri 3 Nabhi naves Karala Shrotaham with tremendous velocity Jagat the universe Achidya cutting short Dhavat running. So the translation reads as follows here. Your wheel, which has 3 naves, rotates around the axis of the imperishable Brahman. It has 13 spokes, 360 joints, 6 rims, and numberless leaves carved upon it. Though its revolution cuts short the lifespan of the entire creation, this wheel of tremendous velocity cannot touch the lifespan of the devotees of the Lord. So I say, and you please repeat, your wheel, which has 3 naves, rotates around the axis of the imperishable Brahman. It has 13 spokes, 360 joints, 6 rims, and numberless leaves carved upon it. Though its revolution cuts short the lifespan of the entire creation, this wheel of tremendous velocity cannot touch the lifespan of the devotees of the Lord. So here's Prabhupada's purport. The time factor cannot affect the span of life of the devotees. In the Bhagavad Gita, it is stated that a little execution of devotional service saves one from the greatest danger. The greatest danger is transmigration of the soul from one body to another. And only devotional service to the Lord can stop this process. It is stated in the Vedic literatures, Harim Vinana Shritim Taranti. Without the mercy of the Lord, one cannot stop the cycle of birth and death. In Bhagavad Gita, it is stated that only by understanding the transcendental nature of the Lord and his activities, his appearance and disappearance, can one stop the cycle of death and go back to him. The time factor is divided into many fractions of moments, hours, months, years, periods, seasons, etc. All of the divisions in this verse are determined according to the astronomical calculation of Vedic literature. There are 6 seasons called ritus, and there is the period of 4 months called chaturmasa. The 3 periods of 4 months complete 1 year. According to the Vedic astronomical calculation, there are 13 months. The 13th month is called Adimas or Mulamas, and is added every 3rd year. The time factor, however, cannot touch the lifespan of the devotees. In another verse, it is stated that when the sun rises and sets, it takes away the life of all living entities, but it cannot take away the life of those who are engaged in devotional service. Time is compared here to a big wheel, which has 360 joints, 6 rims in the shape of the seasons, and numberless leaves in the shape of moments. It rotates on the eternal existence Brahman. Na tejaraksha brahmirayuresham trayodashadam trishatam shashti parva shannemyananta chadiyadrinabhi karala shroto jagat achidya dhavat. Your wheel, which has 3 naves, rotates around the axis of imperishable Brahman. It has 13 spokes, 360 joints, 6 rims, and numberless leaves carved upon it. Though its revolution cuts short the lifespan of the entire creation, this wheel of tremendous velocity cannot touch the lifespan of the devotees of the Lord. This is a description of the Kala Chakra, sometimes called. Kala means time, and Chakra is wheel. And the Kala Chakra is the destroyer of every material situation. The material world is designed in a way that it is constantly dissolving. Whatever integrates in the material world will soon disintegrate. So we have various elements, whether you want to think of them as earth, water, fire, air, and ether, or even in the usual scientific way of, various organic elements, carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, etc. And these elements, they integrate for a period of time, and we see forms. We see bodies, we see buildings, we see various kinds of useful tools and utilities, and then at a certain time they become disintegrated as rust, time, decay eat away at their shape. And the living entity sees these things come and go. But some things come and go on a much, much longer time frame, and so we don't notice them passing away. Particularly our lifetime. We have somewhere between probably 60 and 100 years. And each day we get 1 day older, but 1 day older is so imperceptible that we don't notice any change. And since we are constantly with ourselves, the perception of changing one day at a time is completely lost. However, if we have a friend and that friend lives in a faraway city and they see us, and then later on that friend comes again, maybe some years have passed, 10 years or something like that, immediately they can see we've changed. We have not noticed that we've changed, but someone who doesn't see us every day, second by second, they do notice the change. So we cannot actually notice, but others do notice. So this Kala Chakra causes everyone to lament. We have so many material things, and those material things constitute our possessions. And when they are taken away, we feel a sense of loss or sorrow. But not only are things taken away, as we get older in life, the very body that we inhabit, its facilities, its sensory acuity, its abilities, its knowledge, tends to become eroded by time. So time gradually diminishes, and that's why those who have built a life totally on sense satisfaction lament very greatly when life comes to the very old years, because enjoying sense gratification becomes increasingly more and more difficult as one gets older. The crowning type of sense gratification is, of course, sex life. But when a person becomes very old in the body, then sex life becomes not at all a likely possibility. There's the body's no longer attractive to anybody, and plus the body has so many aches and pains, so that becomes not much of a likelihood. And our food doesn't digest properly. We can't eat so many things. We wind up sleeping a lot of the time because our body aches and various things are going wrong. And one may come to lose one's mental memories even. So there is the debility known as Alzheimer's, where a person gradually forgets who they were or what the relationship is to the people around them. Actually, my mother had this disease or debility that as she became older, she was no longer able to understand many things. She couldn't live by herself. My father passed away some longer time ago, but my mother was still living, and she was living by herself in a house. My sister lived about a couple of 3 miles away, and so there were a lot of difficulties that she encountered because she wasn't able to deal with things properly. She didn't know what was going on, So eventually, my sister had to take my mother to a home where she could be looked after all the time, because otherwise would not be possible for her to maintain a normal life by herself. She wasn't able to understand how to deal with things as Alzheimer's crept up, And what's interesting is towards the last time that I saw my mother, I went to visit her. They don't live in New York. They live in the Midwest in Missouri. And my mother was cheerful, but she had no idea who I was, and she was under the impression that my sister, who she spent a lot of time with, was actually her sister and not her daughter. She misunderstood the relationship. So my sister would constantly remind her that she was not her sister but her daughter. And my mother would say in a surprised sort of expression, "Oh, I have a daughter that's your age?" And unfortunately, my mother was not at all happy that I became a Hare Krishna devotee. So whenever I would go to visit my mother, she was very acidic. It was hard to spend time around my mother. So I couldn't bear to spend any more than a single day there. It was just too much of a trauma for me. Either there was this icy, cold silence, or else there was a sort of constant philosophical war going on. However, when my mother developed Alzheimer's, she no longer knew who I was. However, although she didn't know who I was, she liked me, which was a change from what it had been before, And I always tell this story because it's just so interesting the way Krishna does things, that when I came to leave from being with my mother for a couple of days, she was in the care home, and as I got up to leave, she grabbed my hand and she said, "Oh, it was so nice to have met you." And I thought, well, that's a strange thing for a mother to say to a son, but in a very unusual way, it was so apropos, that we are kind of like incarnated into a relationship in a family. We have these relationships: mother, son, father, daughter, sister, brother, etc., etc. But these are just the happenstances of the reincarnation cycle. And so indeed we are just meeting each other, even though these relationships, we have such a strong sense of what we think they mean. So the Kala Chakra destroys everything, and it takes away whatever it is. As it says in another place in the Srimad Bhagavatam, what the living entity labors so strenuously to accomplish, the time factor destroys in the course. And for this reason, the living entity laments. So whatever we build up will be destroyed by time, because time is constantly integrating and disintegrating. Things are coming and they are going, as it says in Bhagavad Gita, bhutva praliyate, that the living entities, they are born and then again they are annihilated. In the Bhagavad Gita, bhutva praliyate. They come into existence and they're annihilated. And it's kind of interesting, isn't it, that we go through these endless successions of mother, son. We go through these successions of husband and wife, of children, of raising a family, of building a reputation in some occupation. We go through a series of stages, babbling and sputtering as a little infant, and finally getting a little bit accustomed to the body and going through early stages of childhood, and then, of course, who could forget puberty? And then after that, we go through the stages where usually we become married and we raise a family. And then there are the stages where the family is gone and we start to get older and we forget where we put our keys, and all these kind of things happen. And eventually the body dies, and then we do it all over again. And so, as Prabhupada mentions in his purport, that the greatest fear, neha brikrama nasosti pratyavayo navidyate swalpamapiyasya dharmasya trihate bahato bayat, that the greatest fear is falling back into the cycle of reincarnation, because it is like the all-devouring recycling plant, always recycling us from one situation to another situation to another situation. And of course, we're gifted by Brahma with ignorance. We don't remember what we did the last lifetime. And so we are happy to do it all over again. Again, we do the same thing. Bhutva, bhutva, praliyate. And there is that bhajan, Udila Aruna Pura Babage, where Lord Chaitanya is saying, wake up, sleeping souls. You're sleeping in the lap of Maya. And he says, with each day the sun rises and a day passes and is lost, and you spend your time decorating your bodies. This is not the real purpose of life. The Kala Chakra is eating you alive day by day. That the Kala Chakra is allowing new things to be born and come into the world. It feels strange to kind of think of yourself as being older than U.S. presidents, that at one time as a younger person you think that someone who is a U.S. president has to be a pretty old person, but then at a certain point you become older than U.S. presidents. It seems very strange, Everything is accelerated when you're young. One person I read one time described it as when you're a child and in second and third grade. It seems like a year is interminable, that just to graduate from second grade to third grade, it seemed like an entire universe went by, that you were in this situation and suddenly you're in a new room now, and a whole year went by and everything. Then when you get on the other side of life, was that really 10 years ago that happened? I find myself sometimes in awe that I remember being somewhere, or a whole segment of my life as a devotee occurred, and I realized that was 20 years ago, or 30 years ago. And so time is moving on, creating permutations, changing things, constantly churning the material energy. This chapter I wanted to do a kind of quick rundown of it because, we have been in it for a while now. That from verse 1 through 6, we hear Vidura inquiring about Swayambhuva Manu. And then from 7 to 12, Kardama Muni performs austerities. Why does he perform austerities? To please the Supreme Lord, so that he can meet the Supreme Lord. And it says that when the Supreme Lord appeared to Kardama Muni, he was so taken with Kardama Muni's austerities that he cried an entire lake, Bindu Sarovara. So this was the lake that was formed by the tears the Supreme Lord shed thinking about the austerities performed by Kardama Muni. So from 1 to 6, Vidura inquires about Swayambhuva Manu. From 7 to 12, Kardama's austerities cause the Supreme Lord to appear. From 13 to 21, which is where we are right now, Kardama offers prayers to the Supreme Lord. So this is one of the prayers that he offers. He's describing the Kala Chakra. Then from 22 to 33, the Supreme Lord will respond to Kardama Muni. So as we know, Kardama Muni is petitioning the Supreme Lord for a wife, someone who is suitable for him. And the Supreme Lord will respond, and eventually, of course, the Supreme Lord will move Swayambhuva Manu to take his dearest daughter, Devahuti, and bring her to Kardama Muni. And of course, from 34 to 48, the Supreme Lord fulfills his words. And from 49 to 57, Kardama Muni greets King Swayambhuva. So King Swayambhuva will come and gift his daughter to Kardama Muni. And of course then, Kardama Muni, since he's a yogi, we find that this is a yogi couple. We've got the yogi Kardama Muni, and Devahuti is a yogini, so they're both yogis, and they will engage in austerities and living a very simple life. And Devahuti was a princess, but she's living in a very, not very opulent setting at all. And it's said that she served Kardama Muni for many years, and she became frail and emaciated, and her clothes became dirty, and so on and so forth. And eventually, she approached Kardama Muni, and we will read about this, that she will approach Kardama Muni and ask if she can have children. So Kardama Muni obliges her. He creates 9 forms. He is able to divide himself into 9 different Kardama Munis, and he creates a celestial airship that flies in the sky. And they travel all over the universe, like this is kind of, a real idyllic thing. They lived all these austere days, and now they're traveling all over the universe. Of course, Devahuti's body is kind of gone to become not very attractive. So Kardama Muni fixes that by having thousands of maidservants attend Devahuti, and she gets immersed in Bindu Sarovara, and there she regains her incredible beauty, because actually she was described earlier in the Srimad Bhagavatam as being so beautiful that demigods would fall out of their airships by seeing her, so her beauty is restored, and Kardama Muni and his wife Devahuti, they travel throughout the universe in their airship, and they enjoy, eventually 9 daughters are born to Kardama Muni and Devahuti. And then Kardama Muni says, we've enjoyed for a long time, but now it's time for me to take sannyas. And Devahuti says, but now that you're gone, if you go away, then how will I maintain myself? That really, I would like a son. So this is when Kardama Muni comes together with Devahuti, and Kapila Dev will be born. So Kapila Dev is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And he will stay when his father, Kardama Muni, leaves. And Devahuti will hear Sankhya philosophy from her son, Kapila Dev, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So this is what the story will wind up describing. So there's a lot of other things I was thinking about saying, but I want to stop and see if there are any questions, and we can... Yeah, let him get the official microphone so that others can hear as well.
Hare Krishna, everyone. Good morning. My name is Mars. The question about today's lecture, do you think that a child, let's say at the age of 4, can have a deep connection with reincarnation? Can they sense that reincarnation exists? And
I'm having trouble hearing.
Sorry.
He's saying, Maharaj, can a child at the age of 4 have a sense of their past life, reincarnation?
Yeah, sometimes that's been seen. There is, of course, a researcher in the University of Virginia. His name was Ian Stevenson, who started a whole research project about children and memories of their past lives. He's no longer living. He passed on about 5 years ago or something like that. But it's been taken over by one of his understudies, and the research continues. He did interviews with children who spontaneously came forward and remembered their past lives. And these children would say what their memories were, and he would write them down. And then he would do an actual investigation into records to see if indeed the person that they claimed to have been existed, and if the details that the child gives about the person who they claim to have been in a previous life were accurate. And in many cases they were. So this is what Ian Stevenson felt would be very strong evidence of reincarnation. However, the scientific community paid no attention at all to Ian Stevenson's work, thinking it to be just some kind of, disreputable, unscientific field of investigation, which is unfortunately the way that prejudice reveals itself in the way people study these things. Was that what you were asking?
Yeah, absolutely. The only reason why I asked that question.
What?
Sorry.
Speak loudly.
Okay. Hi, can you hear me? Cool. So, reason why I asked that question, because I experienced this at a young age without any reading a book or hearing it from someone, but I felt a deep state of euphoria when I would just daydream. I would feel like I can go back thousands and thousands of years, with my eyes open, and I was always creeped out by it. But when I tried to share that with a therapist, they would
With who?
a therapist, a child
Right.
therapist. They would try to say, "Oh, maybe you read it from a book on Hinduism or Buddha," and I'm like, "No, it's just me, my intuitive connection with the higher being, and just, I guess, having the frequency and the chakras travel through your body and just speak in existence without saying anything, you know." But I think it's interesting what you were saying earlier about the lifespan going 360, you know, the reincarnation and the shedding of the new cycle. Just wanted to get confirmation from that, if that's even, can we as humans at a very early stage in our lifespan have that connection to reincarnation, have that connection to past life?
Yeah, generally speaking, the memory of a past life is usually erased. However, there are situations where people do remember past lives. Ian Stevenson seemed to come to the conclusion that, generally speaking, when there's a trauma or some seriously there's no closure on some issue in the past life, a person will kind of drag the past life into the present life. So this is something that Ian Stevenson noticed by interviewing lots of people who had past life experiences. And that usually at a certain point it kind of becomes less important in the child's life, and the child comes fully into the present life and forgets the past life, or it no longer plays an important role. However, there is a whole field of human endeavor called past life regressions, which is done by, I think there's a researcher named Weiss or something like that, if memory serves, who does a type of hypnosis where a person can be regressed into their past life. And this is done not by just him, but lots of people. There was a technique in psychology for people who had trauma where the researchers in a particular branch of psychology would regress people to their early days, and sometimes they would find out that some trauma that they're experiencing in their present life was something that happened to them when they were very little. And then when they were regressed to where that trauma came from, it kind of caused that trauma to dissipate and go away. Now this regression would sometimes, when the researchers would do this, would go beyond this life into a previous life. And the various psychologists that were doing this technique were kind of bewildered by this. They didn't know what was going on, that they couldn't understand that a person could be regressed before birth, that there was something prior to birth. But after a while, many were having this same experience, and they began to talk with one another, and a whole new field of psychology opened up, which is called past life regression, where that's actually the target of it, is to regress someone into their previous life and find out what their issue might be in this life that comes from a previous life. And this is called past life regression. Of course, if you read the literature about this particular phenomenon, some people do not actually consider that you are going to a previous life. They consider it's some kind of subconscious thing that's happening. That's the way they think of it. But I mean, the most simple way to understand it is that it's actually a person going into their past life. And especially when people have all these memories of a particular previous incarnation. There are two quite famous episodes on the internet. You know, one of them is this episode by a young boy who's named James Leninger. And he, as a child, was having these nightmares of being caught unable to get out of a plane that crashes into the Pacific Ocean during the Second World War, where he's a fighter pilot and he's in a Corsair aircraft that crashes into the ocean, and the cockpit won't open, so he drowns, you know, and he has this recurring nightmare over and over again. And his parents are unable to figure out what's going on. Of course, then the boy starts explaining that he was a fighter pilot and he was in the Second World War and he died in this way. And his father doesn't believe it because his father is a Christian, and he wants to disprove that this is possible. So he writes down everything his son says, and he does research on it. And, you know, the son says that he was stationed on an aircraft carrier called the Natoma Bay, and it turns out there was a Natoma Bay. And then, you know, that he's flying a certain kind of aircraft, which was not the usual kind that was flown in the Second World War. And, you know, eventually the father, again and again, instead of disproving what his son is saying, he corroborates the story that it's actually, the details are correct. And so the father finally reluctantly comes to the conclusion that it looks like his son must have been reincarnated, you know, from a past life, you know. And this reincarnation in a previous life was a fighter pilot in the Second World War. James S. Houston was his previous name, and then his present name is James Leninger. So what's interesting, too, is that there's another very famous story about a man named Robert Snow, who was a cop. He was actually a investigator for the Indianapolis police department. He was a detective. And, you know, he wrote books about police procedure. But because he was, you know, wanting to be a good writer, he would read other people's books, you know, to find out how they would write and their techniques and things like that. So one book he read at one point was about a person having a past life regression. And so his wife, you know, was interested by that, and she asked him what he thought about this book about a person going into a past life. And, you know, this Robert Snow thought, this is not real, you know, I don't believe this. And so she said, well, I know a person who does these kind of regressions. Would you like to try it? And he said, no, I wouldn't want to try it. And then finally his wife and some of her friends were joking with this police officer, and they said, are you scared? And since, of course, he's a police officer, you know, it kind of got under his skin a little bit. So he said, all right, I'll do it. So he took a tape recorder and he went to get his past life regression. And he said, I know this isn't going to work because I have a strong mind. I'm not going to be suggestive the way most people are, suggestible. So he sits down. The whole account is very hilarious. It's on on the internet, Robert Snow in search of Carol Beckwith. So Robert Snow is regressed into a past life, and he said that he didn't think he was going to go under the hypnotic suggestion, but actually he said it was like Disneyland or something like that, where he saw, he could hear things, he could smell things, and at the same time he could sort of feel that he was still in the chair where he was being regressed, and so he went through several past lives, and he had this life as a artist named Carol. Well, he didn't know what the name was at the time he was being regressed, but he remembered painting a painting of a hunchback woman, which is a bizarre thing to paint a painting of, and you wonder why a person would do an art painting of a hunchback woman. It turns out that he, as this artist in the previous lifetime, would do these kind of jobs just to make money, because, his regular artwork wasn't that famous and he didn't get much money for it. So sometimes he would just do these kind of for hire art pieces. And so when he came back after his regression, he heard what he had said on the tape recording. And it was a very vivid image in his mind of this hunchback woman. And he thought that, well, he's a detective, so he knows how to research things. So he thought, I must have seen this in some magazine or in some art gallery or something like that. So he began to research famous paintings. And there was no such painting of this hunchback woman. He couldn't find it in any art book or art source. And so he began to, as a detective, because he's used to doing this kind of thing, he began to approach people in the art market, people who sold art, and he asked them if they'd ever heard of this kind of a painting. And no, there was zero, And he spent a year or two trying to find out where he could, because he thought that he must have just conflated this, that he'd seen it in a book or a movie or something like that, and he was remembering it from that. And it was a very vivid image in his mind. So he couldn't get anywhere with it. Then for their honeymoon, he and his wife went to Louisiana to New Orleans. And before they left to go back to where they lived in Indianapolis, they decided to go to a gallery, one of the galleries that was in New Orleans, one of the art galleries. And his wife liked modern art. He didn't like modern art, so his wife went to a different gallery. And he was looking around in one of the galleries there in New Orleans. And as he was walking through the gallery, suddenly he sees the painting that he remembered in his previous life. And he said that the hair on the back of his neck went up. And he said, I'm a cop. I deal with life and death situations all the time, but this just, I didn't know how to react to this. I was just sort of terrified and stunned. And the art dealer, who can obviously see that this man is having a relationship with this painting, comes over to him and, attempts to sell it to him, because he said, no. But, later he says, I wish I had bought it, but he didn't buy it at the time. But he did write down the name of the artist because he was trying to figure out who was this person that he was in the past life. And it turns out the name was Carol Beckwith. So finally he's able now to find a name that he can research, and he researches the life of Carol Beckwith, and everything he said in his past life regression was actually from the history of this Carol Beckwith, which is a bizarre person. This Carol Beckwith was someone who kept a very detailed diary. In fact, there were thousands of pages, and he was not a very famous person, but this Carol Beckwith knew people like Edgar Allan Poe and others, and he lived evidently in Long Island somewhere, this Carol Beckwith, and he, was this previous incarnation, and so Robert Snow, this police detective, decided to write a book about it. And he wrote a book called In Search of Carol Beckwith, which was his whole, being regressed and trying to come to terms with his previous life. And so this is, another thing that's on the internet. There's a whole him telling the whole story of how it happened. So it's interesting. But this kind of happens, that sometimes people, either through past life regression or as a child spontaneously. There's a researcher called Carol Bowman who interviews children who have past life memories and helps them to deal with the trauma of their past life. And so that's, another person who's active in this field of people remembering past lives. So, although generally speaking, people don't remember past lives, if even a regular person is hypnotized in this particular technique, oftentimes they can be regressed to a past life and give details about it. So, at any rate, I kind of went on about that, but that's something that is a type of investigation that people are doing in the everyday world. Yes.
This wheel of tremendous velocity cannot touch the lifespan of devotees of the Lord.
Right. How does it not touch the lifespan? Well, the devotee is not losing their life because they are situated in their eternal form. As a person engages in devotional service, they enter the timeless eternity of their relationship with the Supreme Lord. So the people in Vaikuntha Loka, they don't age, they don't change their bodies, they're not born, they don't die. They continue in their relationship forever in the spiritual world. So this means that the Kala Chakra has no hold on the life of a devotee. Of course, the devotee's body dies, but the devotee does not identify with the body. He's identifying with his swarup, his original self. So therefore, the Kala Chakra has no jurisdiction over the devotee of the Lord. The Kala Chakra only has jurisdiction over those who identify with their body. Is that satisfactory? I don't know, maybe there's more it could be said about it, but that's what came to my mind.
I'm just asking after class. I don't want to keep everyone so far. It's like,
Anybody can leave if they want, it's...
that's all right. I guess, because on this topic of past life regressions, why is it so often that we hear of people coming back in human bodies, and not only in human bodies, but actually like in this planet, in this world, like in their own families, etc., so close. I mean, this is interesting to me because it suggests that reincarnation, I've heard two different things. It's very unlikely that you're going to get another human body again, Like, this is a very unlikely thing to get a human body, and who knows, it could be 1 million animal bodies that you're going to go through now, or in different lower planets, or because the karma of Kali Yuga people is so bad. So why is it that we hear so much in these regression stories? Because I've heard other stories, even from other devotees, about past life regression, and they seem to often remember lives as humans, past lives as humans.
Well, I'm not sure how exactly to answer that, but I would say a couple of things. That oftentimes in these past life regressions, it's hard to when you go back and forth, it's not so easy to pinpoint exactly which life. It could be 2 or 3 or 4 lives before. We don't know how much time passes in between. And it appears that time is not exactly quantified the same way in all planes. For instance, when you're in the hellish worlds, time seems to take forever. However, from an absolute point of view, when you're out of the hellish worlds, it maybe only took a few moments, but there's this time dilation, time, squeezing aspect. And I think that, it might be that in many cases people don't remember their animal lives, they just focus on their human lives. So that might be a effect as well. But it's one of those things where we don't have any real details about how it occurs in the Vedic literature. But these are what these researchers discover, that when people are regressed, that they go to some previous life. And if a person is not extremely sinful, they might not go deep into the animal, progression. There are 8,400,000 species of life, so 8 million are various animal species, the 400,000 are human species, so a person might not go deep down that cycle and maybe just go through 2 or 3 animal incarnations and come back to the human form. So there are a lot of variables, in the process of reincarnation. It's a complex thing. So sometimes people do a stint in the hellish world, sometimes not. Sometimes they become ghosts for a time. Sometimes they may have a number of different things occur, which kind of create a situation where it's not exactly straightforward that we can count by years by what point a person died, at what point they were born again, and et cetera, et cetera. And we also have the fact that generally because of desire, a person tends to be born in a similar location to where they were before, unless their karma is really bad, where they might not get that option. So there's a tendency to kind of orbit around a particular region because of desire. So we get reincarnated based on our karma, what we did right and wrong in the past, and we also get reincarnated according to our desires. So 2 things figure in as the deciding factors: what we want and what our karma is. I use the analogy of it's like buying a car, that you get a car partly because you can afford it. You can't get a car that you can't afford, And the other, of course, is you get the kind of car that you like. Nobody buys a car they don't like, So both factors play into the overall picture. And living beings are coming and going also from other universes, and there is a giant pool of living beings that have not yet incarnated in this particular yuga, So in Satya Yuga, generally speaking, people are, they have to have fairly good karma to live a life in Satya Yuga. If you've got pretty raunchy karma, you're not going to have a life in Satya Yuga, at least not as a human, But when Kala Yuga comes around, then finally when Kala Yuga comes around, all those people with that kind of raunchy karma can finally, like you and me, they all come out in Kala Yuga, and they get a chance to live their lives, because now in Kala Yuga, it's the fitting environment for that kind of karma. So all those things play into it. So it's like a river, it's flowing. Sometimes, according to our desire, we might take birth in some situation, and in some cases, according to our bad karma, we might not take birth as a human, or we might, but we might have gone through a period of time in the hellish worlds, suffering in various ways before we're again reincarnated as a human. And the time factor may not be easy to calculate, because in certain realms the time duration is different than it is here in the earth plane. So that's how I would respond to it. All right, so we should probably end, but thank you all very much for your kind attention. All glories to Srimad Bhagavatam, all glories to the Vaishnava devotees. Hare Krishna.
This is Bridge Bossy saying, that if you desire a mango at the moment